Hey y'all, Nicholas DeMario here of SterlingKisses.com. Today, we're going to make a larger piece than usual. This bangle has a Lord of the Rings theme to it. It reads, "Not all those who wander are lost" on the inside, and the same on the outside in Elvin. Usually I print jewelry in a castable resin, but larger pieces and lettering can be tricky to cast from that kind of material. So instead I'm going to make a mold of this. That'll let us make a wax copy, which should be easier to cast. This was printed in a standard Elegoo white resin. I cut the supports free before curing, otherwise the print becomes more brittle and more prone to break. With the supports removed, I place it in this sophisticated curing unit for a few minutes. After curing, I notice the white color has yellowed a bit. Here's a side-by-side comparison next to some uncured supports. If anyone knows of a white resin that stays a nice bright white even after curing, please let me know in the comments. It's not important for this project, but I do need a resin that stays a nice bright white color even after curing for a side project. I sand down the areas where the supports were cut free, and I do a little wet sanding to get rid of any minor grow lines. Since I'm making a mold of this piece, I want it to be as perfect as possible. I also use some sticky wax to fill in any little imperfections. There's a small area here that needed more supports and sagged a bit during printing, so I'll just fill it in with some wax. Here I add a sprue leading through the center of the bangle. This will help the wax and metal reach the far end of the piece when it's time to cast. I decided to adjust its position a bit so it's more in line with the main sprue, and more centered to the piece. With the master model prepared, it's time to make a frame for it. I've cut out a few pieces of plexiglass for this. Hot glue works very well to secure the pieces together. To figure out how much mold material I'll need, I like to measure by volume with water. I simply fill the frame with water, then pour this amount into a cup. I noticed a few leaks in my frame while I was doing this, so I'm able to go back and fill those as well. I mark the water level on the cup. This tells me the total volume of mold material I'll need. I then empty the water and make sure everything is dry for the next step. The bangle is temporarily removed from the frame so I can spray a mold release on it. I had some of this leftover smooth cast material from a different project and thought it might work well for making a jewelry mold. It's called PMC 121, and while it works great for other projects, it turns out it's not so great as a jewelry mold. We'll see why a little later. Once both parts are thoroughly mixed, it's placed into a vacuum chamber to degas. It almost overflowed here a couple of times, but I just need to release and reapply the vacuum or burp it a few times to settle down. The freshly vacuumed goop is poured into the mold frame and vacuumed again to free any air bubbles that may have gotten trapped in the lettering or around the piece. No matter how long you vacuum it for, it'll just keep bubbling. It's basically boiling at room temperature under the vacuum, but the bubbles will go away once the vacuum is released. I let it sit overnight, and the next morning I have a beautiful amber mold. I almost hate to cut into it, but that's exactly what we're going to do for our next step. When cutting open a mold like this, I want to make sure that my parting line is hidden, so instead of cutting right down the middle, I'll make the cut right at the top edge of the bangle. I cut a key into the mold by simply cutting down into it. This will help to align both top and bottom parts of the mold later. And I just continue cutting around the top edge of the bangle. Having a clear mold really helps as I cut across to the center sprue. I apply a release agent to the mold. In this case, I brush on some cornstarch. And yes, that is the very same bottle of cornstarch you see in some of my earliest videos. I turn on the wax pot about an hour beforehand. Then I raise the pressure to 10 psi to start with. As I worked with it, I found that this particular smooth cast material is not really suitable for jewelry molds. It's very gummy and was hard to cut. It only has a shore hardness of 30, making it difficult to get a good wax out of without it deforming the mold. I usually use a product called Castaldo's Liquicast, which has a shore hardness of 40. It makes a nice strong mold that doesn't deform when trying to inject wax into it. But I had the leftover material and it was worth a try. I should still be able to get some good patterns out of this. It's not too bad for a first attempt, but the cornstarch leaves too much of a rough surface, and this soft mold is deforming from the pressure. I try it again a few more times, adjusting the pressure and how long I hold it on for. With a little trial and error, I figure out where I need to cut some air vents and how to better hold the mold to avoid deforming it. I also use a spray-on release agent instead of the cornstarch. Finally, I have a couple of waxes that are decent enough to work with. I cut off the bit of flashing and do a little touch-up. I also noticed the heads of the bangle got squished a little and needed to be built up. This is such a large and thin piece that I feel the one sprue going down the center won't be enough to help the molten silver get to the far end of the bangle. So I add a few more feeder sprues, but as an experiment, I only added them to one of the bangles. Investment is mixed and poured into the flask. It was mixed at a water-powder ratio of 38 to 100. After about 5 hours, this large flask goes into the kiln. Barely. After a 12-hour burnout cycle, it's time to cast. I melt the sterling silver at 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, and my flask temperature is 1000 degrees. With the investment cleaned off, let's see how they look. Aside from a little flashing, the bangle with the extra sprues came out perfect. And the one without was so close, but the metal froze right here at the tip. Well, it was worth a try. When in doubt, add an extra sprue. It's too bad this one bangle came out incomplete, but now you get to see how I repair it. I'll start by flattening out these blobs where the metal froze. Next, I cut a piece of silver to fit the shape. Here I use a third and fourth hand to keep everything in place while I apply some flux for soldering. With all the gaps soldered, the excess silver is cut free, and the patch job is blended with the rest of the bangle. The piece is polished, and as a final step, I pen plate gold details onto the head of the bangle. I hope you enjoyed watching this process of taking a 3D print from plastic to silver. I'm Nicholas DeMario of SterlingKisses.com. Thanks for watching.